Hi guys, I'm Shmee. Hello and welcome back to the channel where you join me here in London in the storage with some of the Shmeemobiles, but for one of the last times. Very soon I'm going to be taking the cars to a new temporary location ahead of finding the permanent future Shmuseum, hopefully in the not too distant future. Today though, I would like to talk about two brand new supercars that are fighting head to head. The McLaren 765LT and the AMG GT Black Series. These two cars cost almost exactly the same money, both have about the same performance, are each track-focused supercars, the hardcore derivatives of their base models. They're fighting for the same customers and there will be about the same number of both of them. And as you know, I've ordered one, but today I'd like to talk about some of the pros and cons of both, how they stack up against one another, because last week I drove them back to back on adjacent days to experience what each car was like on track. I'd also like to tell you though which one I actually think might be the better car. Now of course, as you know, I have an affinity to both McLaren and AMG. In fact, I've owned at this point, if you include the GTR Roadster, 5 of each, so they are tied in terms of Shmeemobiles, and in fact the 765LT is the next generation of that, the 675LT, and the GT Black Series is the ultimate version of that, the GTR Pro. So let me tell you some of my thoughts. If you rewind back through the Shmeemobiles, when I've really liked a car, I've often gone and then upgraded it into a new model. For example, a facelift, maybe a track-focused variant, or perhaps a super special limited edition to keep in the collection. I think this is effectively putting my money where my mouth is, because if I bought two of what could be seen as the same car, I must genuinely like it, and this is completely the case for the two cars right behind me. To focus on all of the cars in the garage for a moment, of course, with the likes of the Ford GT and the McLaren Senna, those are more one-offs, not things that get superseded immediately. With the likes though of the GTC4 Lusso, before that had come the FF, and the Lusso, although technically a new model, is a very heavy facelift. It's based on the same engine, gearbox, platform, powertrain, four-wheel drive system, just with new infotainment and a new look. So you can see why I'd go from the FF to the Lusso. This is very notable with my Focus RSs, having gone from the original launch spec nitrous blue RS into the race red, the red edition, my project car, one of 300, and then ultimately into the Heritage Edition, just over there, one of only 50 cars to keep in the garage. But when it comes to both of these, they have had quite a history. With McLarens, I bought my first McLaren 7 years ago, the MP4 12C. About a year later, I upgraded that car into the 650S Spider, both a convertible, but also really the facelift of the 12C. Then along came the track-focused variant, the 675LT, the coupe, one of only 500, my first new supercar as it happens, which I then changed up into the 675LT Spider, again 500 units like the coupe, limited edition, and a car I'll be keeping for the long term, having now done almost 17,000 miles with it. So with the McLarens, those are all based on the P11 chassis, not the Senna, but the other four. Then over on the AMG side, the GTR was my first AMG GT car. It was about 3 years ago that I bought it. I did 20,000 miles with it. The GTR, the Beast of the Green Hell, wasn't a limited edition per se, but I was lucky to get an early car, and then replaced that with the GTR Pro, the facelift with new infotainment, new headlights, and a few other changes, as well as being even more track-focused and one of 750. I've also got the GTR Roadster coming quite soon as well, based on the GTR, but the facelift and of course a Roadster, again 750 cars, and as I announced recently, they will be joined, or well in fact one might have left by then, by the GT Black Series as well, alongside the SLS. So in the McLaren camp, the garage has the LT Spider and the Senna. In the AMG camp, it has the G63, the Pro, the SLS Black Series, Roadster to come, GT Black Series to come. So you can see that I've got this affinity to these two brands, and I think a bit of that goes back to growing up, watching and supporting McLaren in Formula One back at the time, and with Mercedes, my parents always had a Mercedes. I remember my dad's E55 AMG, so it was inevitable that the AMGs would arrive in the garage at some point in future. But this is where it gets really interesting to me. This year, we saw the arrival of the cars from each of the manufacturers in exactly the same segment. The 765LT launched at the replacement to the Geneva Motor Show back in March. The GT Black Series was due to have been launched at the N24, the Nürburgring 24-hour race back in May, which was postponed, so the car came a little bit later in July. But both cars were at their respective race circuits for the first drive by the media, including myself, not that long ago, just a week or two ago, and I actually drove them back to back. One day I was at Silverstone with the 765LT, then I caught a flight to Berlin out of Heathrow to drive down to the Lausitzring with my SLS Black Series to drive the GT Black Series to get a proper feel for how they stack up. Like I said, they are completely on the money, on the spec, one versus the other. To go over some of these details, both cars have 4-litre twin-turbo V8s. Yes, the 765 has a little bit more power, 765 horsepower instead of 730, but both have 800 newton meters of torque, both have 7-speed dual-clutch gearboxes, both send all the power to the rear wheels, both have massive amounts of aerodynamics to be suitable on the track, both come on track-focused tyres. You can see where some of this is going. A few people have thought about the pricing in the UK. It's $280,000 for the 765, $335,000 for the GT Black Series, but don't be confused because the 765LT doesn't include options, whereas the GT Black Series includes every option as standard. When you've realistically specced up your 765LT, you're going to be $330 to $340. The same money. When it comes to production numbers, 765, that is the number of coupes that will be made of the LT, also the number of Spiders. So we're talking 1,530 cars, plus some special editions. Presumably there will be an HS, there'll be a Carbon Series, maybe there'll be an R, who knows what will come, but perhaps 1,600, 1,700 cars. The GT Black Series is not officially a limited production model, it's limited by time, but I would bet there are going to be about 1,500 to 2,000 of those cars. So we've got the same number of cars at the same price point with about the same performance. Well, to be fair, the 765LT is a touch faster. The 0 to 200 kilometer an hour times or 124 mile an hour times are 7 seconds for the LT and under 9 seconds for the GT, which is a fair whack behind. But remember, a lot of that is about traction. The GT is very much a European muscle car, and that plays quite a big role in this. So we've got these two cars then that basically literally are against one another. Let's go through though some of the pros and also some of the cons of these two overall fantastic cars. There are many brilliant things to say about each of them, but I'd like to pick out some of the highlights and some of the things that are not so good as well, especially now that I've had time to reflect on the experiences of driving them back to back and how these two cars actually stack up against one another. Is the GT Black Series the right car to have bought, or is the 765LT actually the better one of the two? And how does this all tie in to the other Shmeemobiles in the garage as well? So I'm going to kick off with the pros and cons of the 765LT, which I drove at Silverstone on the international circuit. The car that I'm going to start with the pros is an absolute supercar. It has the supercar experience. You just look at the thing, it looks amazing. It has the dihedral doors, everything about it is bespoke. It has the supercar experience through and through. Yes, it's not as crazy as the Senna, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. This is what you want when you purchase a car of this price, and you want it to be something that's exciting. The second thing is the power delivery. My word, when you're always on boost, this thing is so quick. It's as fast in a straight line as the Senna, I'm sure. Yes, it doesn't have the wing, which means it doesn't have quite as much downforce, but that is also drag when you're in a straight and going down the hanger straight. Seeing the numbers build, sometimes I was forgetting that it was in miles an hour, not kilometers. The way it reached 170 down towards the end, which is about 270 kilometers an hour, it is just ballistic. The third thing I'd like to touch on is something that McLarens have always done incredibly well: the steering, the handling. The combination of hydraulic steering and hydraulic suspension just gives you this pinpoint precision. It doesn't have the same engineered-in understeer that the Senna has, which helps you get towards the limit of the car a little bit more. So it's a bit more playful, a bit more fun, but similarly to the other cars, and I fell in love with it back on the P11s, the 765LT, the steering is a delight. But let's move on to some of the cons as well. Some of the things that you might be expecting me to talk about, and the first I want to mention are quality issues. Now, these have been well documented. Cars rolling out of the factory already with a few problems, not going through the full quality control. I've had a couple that have plagued me along the way, some paintwork problems, a few small niggles with the Senna. I appreciate that others have had many more problems than I have, but McLaren unfortunately don't have a great reputation for quality, and I think it's something that needs to be worked on. Of course, the 765LT is a brand new model, so it's impossible to say for this car specifically, just going from history a little bit here. The second, on a similar topic, is reliability. You know, the paintwork issues with my LT have taken it off the road for almost a year or so in total to get those resolved. I've not had any major mechanical problems, so to speak. My LT had a thermostat issue when I was in France a couple of years ago, but that was just a sensor, easy to replace, and the Senna has had no issues really to talk about, just one small thing with the suspension that we were able to fix actually at the side of the road at the time. But they have some of these issues. These are things. The other thing I'd like to touch on, the D word, depreciation. All of these new cars, the GT Black Series included, are all going to go and depreciate. It's a simple world of supply and demand. The demand over the last couple of years has been insane, so manufacturers have upped their output. The supply of these limited editions is now plentiful, and it doesn't balance. All of these cars now are going to depreciate. I think the days of cars appreciating in money outside of truly special stuff from the likes of Ferrari and Porsche, those days are gone. This isn't going to happen again. So the 765LT is going to lose a lot of money. Let's be real about it. But if you want to spec the car from new, be the person who collects it with 0 miles on the clock from the dealership, you have to be the first customer. So that's how it works. Similarly though, I would like to talk about some of the pros and the cons of the GT Black Series. And the first pro that I'm going to touch on is how easy that car is to drive really fast. The GTR and the GTR Pro have always done this, and the Black Series does it in the same way, but with 730 horsepower. So you get a massive shove as well. Not quite as quick as the 765LT, but a car that is undeniably fast, but very easy to drive fast. The next thing, in this case the opposite, I think, of the McLarens, I'm going to say reliability is a pro. My AMGs have always done me brilliantly. My 20,000 miles, 30,000 kilometers in the GTR, even though it had new Rentec turbos and downpipes, the cars have always worked flawlessly for me. Yes, I had one issue with the intercooler, you might remember, at the front, because the early cars didn't have a mesh over them, which meant they could get chipped and leak out and the gearbox would overheat, but they did fix that. Mercedes were great about it. They made sure it got fixed even though it was abroad, got the car back home all fine. So reliability I'm going to put on that list. Another thing I'm going to put on, which affects probably me more than it does others, is the practicality of the AMG GT. We're talking a front mid-mounted supercar, front mid-engined supercar, but with a massive boot, decent seats, decent space, and very usable to actually drive as well. With all the creature comforts, adaptive cruise control, I mean, you get a lot of creature comforts with the 765LT, but decent boot space, even though there's a cage in there as well. There is a fair amount of luggage space in the 765, don't get me wrong. The GT Black Series is just a brilliant car to actually drive as well. Now, I should give some cons of the car too. The first I want to say is that it's still an AMG GT that costs about 3.5 times what the original AMG GT launched at back in 2015 for the base model, the GT, not the GTS. And then obviously we've had the GT, GTS, GTC, GTR, GTR Pro, GT Black Series, and some Roadsters, and 50th anniversary, and even more. So the lineup has become very, very confusing. In fact, I guess a lot of cars are all getting confusing with how many different models that they've actually gone out to make. The other thing I want to say is that perhaps it should be a touch faster. Perhaps if you're spending $335,000, you should have a car that does 0 to 200 Ks, 124 miles, in 8 seconds, not 9 seconds. I know this is really clutching at things here, but it's not perhaps as quick as you think it might be. The last con, you probably know exactly what I'm going to say if you saw my first video, the fake sound inside. It is maddening. I will say instantly, in race mode, you hear that it is very loud in here. You hear a lot of the sound out of this thing that comes obviously through the speakers. The Pro did it a bit, the regular GTR originally didn't. Oh wow, but you can instantly lean on it. You can just lean on the car straight away. This did it a bit, but the GT Black Series took me by surprise. As soon as I was pulling out on track and I started hearing the sounds from the speakers, I was like, what is this? Because the engine from outside, the new flat plane crank V8, actually sounds quite decent, but inside it's horrendous. I think myself and many other customers are going to be eliminating that sound if there is any way to do it. Coding for sure. Please, Rentec, can we find a way? Because we need to get rid of this. I don't want that in my car at all. It's not good. So we've got some pros and some cons then of both of them. But what about my choices? Well, this actually tears me up a little bit because I left the 2 test drives honestly thinking that for driving on track, the 765LT is the better car. I think if I was a customer who was going to buy this car to do 1, 2, 3,000 miles a year, including a few track days, the 765LT probably makes the most sense. But this is where the garage comes in because, of course, I have that car, which I think is a slightly better road car, and I have the Senna, which is a slightly better track car, and neither of them am I going to sell. So the 765LT for me would kind of sit between these two, and it wouldn't really work in the garage. Whereas the GT Black Series will ultimately supersede the Pro, serving a slightly different purpose, and it's very different from the SLS Black Series. While having them together, the two cars, is fantastic to be able to experience. So for me, although I think the 765LT is a better way to spend the money, I'm going with the GT Black Series because I think it will be more reliable and better for my road trips, while also making more sense in my garage overall. And I think this is quite an interesting one because for different people, obviously cars have different purposes. Some want to drag race, some want to do track days, some want to daily drive them, some want to take them on road trips. You all have different, well, everyone has different criteria for what they want out of cars, and these two cars, despite being about the same power, price and production number, do actually do things differently. There's no two ways of actually going about that. They are slightly different cars. So I'm going the GT Black Series route. I'm not necessarily excluding a 765LT future derivative. I'll see what comes and whether it makes sense down the line. But for the time being, the GT Black Series will join my obsession with the AMGs while still enjoying both of my two McLarens. It doesn't make sense for me personally to add a third one at this time. But what we're talking about here are two amazing cars. Yes, they're both very expensive. If you think about it, you can pick up an early used 720S for about £120,000, so just under or just over a third of the 765LT, and the same story with the GTR, because the used original GTR is just under £100,000, so less than a third of a GT Black Series, which is crazy when you consider that they're derivatives of the same thing. Yes, okay, the GT Black Series is entirely new bodywork. In fact, both cars have significantly new bodywork, engine development, whole new engine for the Black Series, and plenty more. So it's not really fair to compare them in that respect. But cars like these, as I said, are all now going to depreciate. There's this world where, I mean, even when the GTR Pros were originally allocated to 750 cars, I did receive plenty of messages for people saying, I've been offered one, should I buy it? Is it going to appreciate? And even then, a year ago, well, is that a year ago now, or is it 2 years ago? A year and a half ago, wow, time is flying by. I was saying to people, no, that's just not how it works anymore. And yes, of course, they've now depreciated. They've lost probably 20 grand, 30 grand. I don't know what it's been in a year exactly because I'm not ready to sell mine. But this is the way these things are going to go. People with the, I guess, confusion, even with the GT Black Series, if I could count the number of messages I've received saying the GT Black Series is going to appreciate, I would be a wealthy man right now, well, with enough money to go and buy a 765LT as well without thinking about it. It's not the case. These cars will depreciate. There are so many of them being made. As much as I would love this car to go up in value, it won't. And that's why I will buy it, drive it, use it, Nürburgring it, road trip it, take it to America, maybe do Gumball 3000 in it. Who even knows? The GT Black Series is going to do a lot of mileage in its first year. But here are basically my thoughts then of how these two cars compare to one another. It's fascinating to have experienced them in such a close time frame, to have driven them back to back. And yes, it would be fantastic to do both, but I feel very lucky with the cars that I do have in the garage that I am able to enjoy. And hopefully there'll be an opportunity as well to drive them back to back on the road at some point to see if that carries through, because you never really know. When you're driving cars on the track, it's very different to bumpy countryside tarmac and requires a completely different setup. For now though, I hope you've enjoyed some thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this type of approach to give you more feedback after having driven a car, away from the moment when I've had time to reflect and take in some more of my thoughts and explain a little bit about how this fits in the garage from all of the questions that people have asked as to, well, why there isn't a 765 on order yet, and what's going to be happening and why I've chosen the GT Black Series. For now though, thank you for watching. I'm sorry for waffling on for quite so long, but I wanted to share some of my thoughts on this topic. As always though guys, your support is really appreciated. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. Cheers.